If you are praying the Rosary this way, you may be unknowingly closing doors that heaven wants to open for you in 2026. This is not meant to frighten you, but to wake you up. Because the Rosary is not a decoration for your spiritual life, it is a lifeline. And Padre Pio, who fought demons almost every night of his life, warned that when this prayer is reduced to habit, speed, or empty repetition, it loses much of the grace God wants to pour out through it. Many faithful Catholics pray the Rosary every day and still feel spiritually dry, constantly attacked, restless, or stuck in the same battles year after year. Padre Pio would say the problem is not the Rosary itself, but how it is being prayed. The danger is not that God stops listening, but that the soul stops receiving. Padre Pio once said that the Rosary is the weapon for our times, but a weapon must be used correctly. A sword swung blindly can injure the one holding it. In the same way, a Rosary prayed without the heart can become noise instead of power. This is why he was so direct, even severe, when correcting people. He knew what was at stake. He saw souls who prayed constantly, yet remained spiritually exposed because their prayer never descended from the lips into the heart. And as we approach a new year, a year that will demand clarity, perseverance, and deep faith, this warning becomes even more urgent. Many people begin a new year asking for blessings, protection, peace in their family, healing, or direction. But Padre Pio would say that grace does not flow into a distracted soul. It flows into a receptive one. If you pray the Rosary while rushing, scrolling, multitasking, or simply trying to get it done, you may be doing something holy in appearance while missing its transforming power. The Rosary is not a checklist, it is a meeting, and meetings require presence. Padre Pio taught that the Rosary is meant to slow the soul down so that God can work. That is why the enemy hates it so much. The devil does not fear beads, he fears meditation, he fears silence filled with faith. He fears a soul that truly enters the mysteries of Christ through Mary. When the Rosary is prayed mechanically, it does not disturb him, but when it is prayed correctly, it drives him back. Padre Pio knew this from experience. He held the Rosary during spiritual attacks, not because it was comforting, but because it was effective. One of the gravest mistakes, according to Padre Pio, is praying the Rosary without intention. Many people begin without offering it for anything specific. They do not consciously entrust their family, their struggles, their sins, or the coming year to God. They simply begin reciting. Padre Pio would say that such a Rosary is like a letter with no address. Heaven receives it, but its power is scattered. Intention gathers prayer. It gives it direction, and direction gives it force. Another error he warned about is praying without awareness of the mysteries. The Rosary is not primarily about repeating prayers. It is about entering the life of Christ. Each mystery is a moment of salvation, and when you meditate on it, you place your own life inside it. If you rush through the words without even recalling what mystery you are praying, you are separating the body of the Rosary from its soul. Padre Pio said that when the mysteries are ignored, the Rosary becomes thin, fragile, and easily broken under spiritual pressure. He also warned against praying without humility. Some people rely on quantity and feel secure because they pray many rosaries. Padre Pio did pray many rosaries, but never to impress God or himself. He prayed them as a beggar. He knew that one rosary prayed with humility opens more doors than many prayed with pride or routine. God is not moved by volume. He is moved by surrender. As we approach 2026, Padre Pio's warning becomes sharper. He believed that the beginning of a year is spiritually decisive. How you pray at the start sets the tone for what follows. If the Rosary is prayed carelessly now, the soul becomes accustomed to shallow prayer. If it is prayed attentively, the soul becomes anchored. This is not about fear of punishment. It is about not wasting grace. Grace is offered, but not forced. Padre Pio often said that Mary does not refuse a single rosary prayed with love, but he also said that she weeps when it is prayed without attention. Not because she is offended, but because she sees how much more God wants to give and how little the soul is ready to receive. The tragedy is not unanswered prayer. The tragedy is unopened gifts. This is why this message matters now. Not next year, not someday, now. If your rosary has become automatic, distracted, rushed, or dry, it does not mean you should stop praying. It means you are being invited to pray differently. Padre Pio never discouraged prayer. He corrected it. Correction is an act of love. In the coming year, many will look for security in money, plans, predictions, or distractions. Padre Pio would say that true protection is spiritual, and the rosary prayed correctly builds a wall that no visible force can break. But that wall is built bead by bead, with attention, humility, intention, and trust. If this message speaks to you, do not ignore it. Pause. Reflect on how you pray. Ask yourself honestly whether your rosary is a meeting or a habit. And if you feel this call, write a simple prayer in the comments, even just, "Mary, teach me to pray." That small act of humility already opens the heart. Stay with this channel if you want to go deeper. Subscribe not for content, but for formation. We are not here to entertain, but to help souls pray better, live more awake, and walk into 2026 with faith that is rooted, not rushed. This is only the beginning. Many people assume that if they are holding the rosary in their hands, grace is automatically flowing. Padre Pio warned that this assumption is one of the most dangerous spiritual illusions. Grace is always offered, but it is not always received. And the difference is not in heaven, it is in the soul. In 2026, when distractions will be louder, faster, and more constant than ever, the way you pray will determine whether your faith deepens or slowly weakens without you even realizing it. This is why Padre Pio insisted that the rosary must never be treated as background noise in a busy life. It must become the center that orders everything else. Padre Pio taught that one of the clearest signs a rosary is being prayed incorrectly is inner agitation. If after praying you feel just as anxious, restless, irritated, or spiritually scattered as before, something is missing. Not because God ignored you, but because the soul never truly entered prayer. He used to say that true prayer always leaves a trace. Even if problems remain, the heart becomes quieter. If that quiet is absent, the prayer stayed on the surface. One of the most subtle mistakes is praying the rosary while the mind is already planning the next task. Many people pray while walking, driving, lying in bed half asleep, or scrolling between decades. Padre Pio was not rigid about posture, but he was uncompromising about attention. He said that divided prayer produces divided fruit. You may still receive something, but not what God intended to give. In a year where clarity will be essential, divided prayer produces confusion, not guidance. Another serious error Padre Pio warned about is praying the rosary without silence before and after. Silence is not empty time, it is the doorway to encounter. When people begin praying immediately after noise, arguments, media, or stress, the soul has no time to shift gears. The lips begin before the heart is present. Padre Pio always urged a short moment of interior stillness before the first prayer. He said even 30 seconds of conscious silence prepares the soul more than rushing into 10 decades distracted. He also warned against treating the rosary as a spiritual bargain. Many people pray with an unspoken attitude of exchange. I pray, so God should fix this. Padre Pio said this mentality poisons prayer. The rosary is not leverage, it is surrender. When prayer is reduced to a transaction, disappointment follows. When it becomes an offering, peace follows. In 2026, many will pray out of fear of what might happen. Padre Pio would say, fear closes the heart, and a closed heart cannot receive grace. A rosary prayed incorrectly often lacks trust. Some people pray while secretly doubting that anything will change. They recite the prayers but keep emotional distance as a form of self-protection. Padre Pio said, this wounds prayer at its root. The rosary is not about convincing God to act. It is about allowing God to act. Doubt does not stop God's power, but it blocks the soul's openness. Another warning he gave concerns praying without conversion. Many people pray faithfully while refusing to let go of resentment, sin, pride, or unhealthy attachments. Padre Pio was blunt about this. He said prayer without conversion becomes noise in heaven, not because God rejects it, but because the soul refuses transformation. The Rosary is meant to soften the heart. If year after year the heart remains hardened, the prayer is being resisted from within. As a new year approaches, Padre Pio would urge a painful but necessary question. Has your Rosary changed you? Not emotionally for a moment, but structurally, in how you live, forgive, speak, and choose. If the answer is no, it does not mean you failed. It means God is calling you deeper. The tragedy is not praying wrongly. The tragedy is refusing correction. Padre Pio insisted that the Rosary should be prayed as if it were your last. Not dramatically, but sincerely. When prayer becomes casual, grace becomes diluted. When prayer becomes intentional, grace reorganizes life. He believed many people miss major graces simply because they pray while spiritually half awake. The Rosary was never meant to be sleepy. It was meant to be watchful. He also warned against praying without bodily reverence when possible. He said, the body teaches the soul. When the body slouches, rushes, fidgets, the soul follows. He encouraged kneeling when possible, holding the Rosary attentively, slowing the breath. These external acts are not superstition, they are discipline, and discipline is freedom. In 2026, many will say they have no time to pray deeply. Padre Pio would respond that this is precisely why prayer must be deep. Shallow prayer fits into busy lives. Transforming prayer reshapes them. One Rosary prayed well will save more time than 10 prayed poorly, because it brings order where chaos rules. There is also a hidden danger Padre Pio warned about: praying the Rosary while remaining emotionally closed. Some people pray while numbing themselves, using repetition to avoid feeling pain, grief, or fear. Padre Pio said this turns prayer into anesthesia instead of healing. The Rosary is meant to bring wounds into the light, not hide them. Mary does not soothe by distraction, she heals by truth. As the year turns, this is the invitation being offered. Not to abandon the Rosary, but to reclaim it. Not to pray more, but to pray awake. Not to fear judgment, but to refuse wasted grace. Padre Pio believed that the coming times would separate those who pray habitually from those who pray consciously. The difference will not be visible at first, but it will become clear under pressure. If you feel challenged by this, that is a good sign. True spiritual warnings do not comfort first, they awaken first. Comfort follows obedience. This is not condemnation, it is an opening. In the next part, we will move from warning to direction. How to realign your Rosary so it becomes a shield again, a source of peace again, and a living prayer that carries you through 2026 instead of leaving you spiritually exhausted. For now, pause and reflect honestly, not with guilt, but with courage. Ask yourself whether your Rosary is something you endure or something you enter. That answer will shape everything that comes next. Padre Pio did not stop at warnings. He always moved from diagnosis to remedy. After exposing the dangers of a distracted and shallow Rosary, he insisted on something far more demanding and far more hopeful: interior alignment. He said the Rosary only becomes powerful when the soul, the mind, and the will are pointing in the same direction. When even one of these is divided, prayer loses its edge. In 2026, when many believers will feel spiritually tired without understanding why, this alignment will be decisive. The first element Padre Pio emphasized was intention purified of anxiety. Many people begin the Rosary already tense, already demanding results, already rehearsing outcomes. Padre Pio warned that this interior pressure suffocates prayer. He taught that the Rosary must be offered, not forced. You place your intentions in Mary's hands and then let go. When you cling, you block. When you surrender, grace flows. This is difficult for modern souls trained to control everything, but without surrender the rosary becomes exhausting instead of strengthening. He taught that before the first bead, the soul must make a quiet decision: I am here to be with God, not to escape my life. This single decision changes everything. Many pray to avoid pain, fear, or responsibility. Padre Pio said prayer is not avoidance, it is confrontation with light. The rosary brings truth gently, but it does bring truth. If you pray only to feel better, you will eventually feel frustrated. If you pray to belong more fully to God, peace comes even when circumstances do not change. Another correction Padre Pio insisted on was emotional honesty. He rejected the idea that prayer must always feel serene or holy. He said, God prefers a wounded, honest rosary to a polished, empty one. If you are angry, confused, tired, or afraid, bring that into the prayer. Do not hide it behind perfect words. Mary is not scandalized by your weakness. She is drawn to it. A rosary prayed with honesty opens the heart. A rosary prayed with performance closes it. Padre Pio also warned against the illusion that repetition equals devotion. He prayed many rosaries daily, but never to accumulate numbers. He said repetition without attention becomes spiritual sedation. The mind falls asleep, the heart disconnects, and the soul learns nothing. The rosary is repetitive so it can deepen, not so it can be rushed. Each repetition is meant to sink the mystery further into the soul, like water slowly shaping stone. A major reason many people lose fruit from the rosary is that they separate it from daily life. Padre Pio taught that prayer must echo after the last bead. If the rosary ends and nothing changes in how you speak, forgive, choose, or endure, the prayer has not been allowed to mature. He said, the rosary plants seeds, but obedience waters them. Without that cooperation, the soil hardens again. He was especially firm about forgiveness. He said, the rosary prayed with resentment in the heart becomes heavy and unproductive, not because God refuses it, but because resentment blocks grace. In 2026, relationships will be strained, families divided, and old wounds reopened. Padre Pio would say that praying the rosary without forgiving is like locking the door while asking God to enter. Forgiveness is not an emotion, it is an act of the will. Even imperfect forgiveness clears the channel. Another correction he offered concerns posture of the will. Many pray passively, waiting for God to do everything. Padre Pio taught that the rosary is cooperative grace. Heaven moves, but the soul must move with it. This means making concrete decisions inspired by prayer. If the rosary brings clarity about a change you must make and you ignore it, prayer loses momentum. Obedience fuels prayer. Delay weakens it. Padre Pio also emphasized spiritual consistency. He warned against praying intensely for a short time and then abandoning prayer when results are not immediate. He said grace works organically, not mechanically. The rosary reshapes the soul slowly, often invisibly. In 2026, many will give up prayer too early, mistaking silence for absence. Padre Pio said, silence often means God is working deeper than emotions can reach. He taught that the rosary must be prayed with humility, not spiritual ambition. Some pray hoping to feel powerful, protected, or special. Padre Pio said, this attracts pride, not grace. The rosary is not meant to elevate you above others, but to lower you into trust. When humility is present, protection follows naturally. When pride enters, fear increases. One of his most important teachings concerned expectation. Many people expect immediate emotional consolation from prayer. Padre Pio warned that God sometimes withholds consolation to strengthen faith. A dry rosary does not mean a useless rosary. Often, it is the most powerful one. In those moments, prayer becomes an act of love rather than feeling. This kind of prayer matures the soul. As the year approaches, Padre Pio's message becomes urgent. The rosary must no longer be treated as a habit alone. It must become a relationship. Relationships require attention, honesty, patience, and fidelity. Without these, repetition becomes hollow. With them, even one decade can change a day. This is where many believers will either deepen or drift. The Rosary will not disappear from their lives, but its role will change. For some, it will remain a routine. For others, it will become an anchor. The difference lies not in time, intelligence, or spirituality, but in willingness to pray awake. Take a moment now, not emotionally but truthfully. Ask yourself whether your Rosary has been something you finish or something you enter, whether it has shaped your decisions or merely filled space. This reflection is not meant to accuse, but to prepare. In the next part, we will move into the practical interior posture that Padre Pio believed unlocks the Rosary's protective power, especially in times of spiritual instability. What you are about to hear is not dramatic, but it is decisive. It is the difference between prayer that comforts briefly and prayer that carries you through whatever comes next. Padre Pio went even deeper by teaching that the Rosary is not only a prayer of words and meditation, but a prayer of interior posture. He insisted that how you stand before God while praying matters as much as what you say. Many people kneel physically yet remain internally resistant, distracted, or self-protective. Padre Pio said, "Heaven responds not to posture of the body, but posture of surrender." This is where many rosaries quietly lose their power. He explained that the soul praying the Rosary must adopt what he called the attitude of availability. This means praying without preconditions, not praying with hidden ultimatums like, "I will trust God if He fixes this," or "I will pray as long as I feel peace." These conditions, often unconscious, create inner resistance. Grace does not force itself through resistance, it waits. In 2026, many faithful will pray intensely, but remain internally guarded. Padre Pio would say that grace is knocking, but the door is still latched from the inside. One of the most overlooked mistakes in praying the Rosary is praying while inwardly negotiating. People bargain with God instead of entrusting themselves to Him. Padre Pio warned that bargaining weakens prayer because it places the soul above God as judge of outcomes. True prayer places the soul below God as receiver of wisdom. The Rosary is not meant to convince God, it is meant to convert the one praying. Padre Pio taught that every Rosary should include an interior act of consent. Consent to God's will, even when it remains unclear. This consent does not require understanding, it requires trust. When Mary said her yes, she did not know how everything would unfold. She knew only whom she trusted. The Rosary, prayed correctly, trains the soul to echo that same yes repeatedly, bead by bead, day by day. Another major correction Padre Pio emphasized concerns impatience. Many people pray the Rosary expecting immediate clarity or relief. When it does not come, discouragement sets in. Padre Pio said impatience is a subtle form of pride. It assumes we know how fast God should work. The Rosary is not a stopwatch, it is a formation. God often delays consolation not as punishment, but as protection against superficial faith. He explained that impatience short-circuits the Rosary's deeper effects. The prayer begins to reshape the soul quietly, altering reactions, softening hardness, strengthening endurance. These changes are often invisible until one day the soul realizes it is standing where it would have collapsed before. Padre Pio said this is how true grace reveals itself, not by dramatic moments, but by sustained strength. He also warned against praying the Rosary while refusing interior silence. Many people recite the prayers, but never allow silence between mysteries, between decades, or even within themselves. Padre Pio insisted that silence is not absence of prayer. It is the soil where prayer takes root. Without moments of silence, the Rosary becomes a monologue rather than a dialogue. Silence does not mean emptiness, it means availability. It is in silence that God adjusts the soul's orientation. Padre Pio would often pause during the Rosary, sometimes for several minutes, simply remaining still. Those watching thought he was distracted. He was listening. He taught that the Rosary creates space for God to speak, but only if the soul stops filling every moment with words. Another critical teaching concerned emotional detachment. Padre Pio warned that clinging to emotional consolation can distort prayer. Some people become attached to how prayer makes them feel, rather than what prayer is doing within them. When feelings disappear, they assume prayer has failed. Padre Pio said this is dangerous. God sometimes removes sweetness to strengthen fidelity. The Rosary prayed without emotional reward, but with perseverance is especially powerful. It forms a faith that does not depend on sensation. In times of crisis, this kind of faith stands firm. Padre Pio believed that many believers would face spiritual dryness in the coming years, not because God is distant, but because he is preparing them for endurance. He also taught that praying the Rosary requires vigilance against self-centered intention. Many pray exclusively for personal relief while ignoring the wider needs of the Church, the suffering, the forgotten, the souls in purgatory. Padre Pio insisted that the Rosary expands the heart. When prayer remains narrow, it stagnates. When prayer becomes intercessory, it multiplies in power. He said that Mary listens attentively when her children pray, not only for themselves, but for others who cannot pray. This is why he constantly urged prayer for souls in purgatory. These souls cannot help themselves, and prayers offered for them return with extraordinary graces. A Rosary that includes intercession becomes spiritually fertile. Another correction Padre Pio offered concerns consistency of life. He said the Rosary cannot compensate for a life lived in deliberate contradiction to God's commands. Prayer does not replace repentance, it supports it. If someone prays the Rosary while refusing to forgive, persistently lying, or rejecting moral truth, the prayer becomes conflicted. God still listens, but transformation slows. This does not mean perfection is required. Padre Pio was gentle with weakness. What he rejected was stubbornness. The Rosary must be accompanied by willingness to change. Even small changes open large doors. Grace works with cooperation, not resistance. Padre Pio also spoke about the Rosary as spiritual protection, but he clarified that protection is not avoidance of suffering. It is preservation of faith within suffering. Many misunderstand this. They expect the Rosary to remove trials. Often it strengthens the soul, to endure them without losing hope. This is a higher form of protection. He taught that the Rosary does not always quiet the storm, but it anchors the soul within it. Those who pray correctly may still suffer, but they do not collapse internally. Fear loses its grip. Despair weakens. Clarity emerges slowly. As 2026 approaches, Padre Pio's warning becomes sharper. A distracted, impatient, emotionally dependent Rosary will not sustain believers through prolonged uncertainty. A Rosary prayed with surrender, silence, trust, and obedience will. Ask yourself honestly, do you pray to control outcomes or to be transformed? Do you pray to escape discomfort or to meet God within it? These questions are uncomfortable but necessary. The Rosary reveals what the soul is seeking. In the next part, we will explore the final interior disposition Padre Pio believed seals the Rosary with lasting spiritual fruit. It is the most demanding and the most liberating aspect of this prayer. Without it, everything remains partial. With it, the Rosary becomes not only a prayer, but a way of living. Padre Pio taught that there is one interior mistake that quietly empties the Rosary of its deepest power, and it is the most difficult one for modern believers to recognize. Praying without allowing the Rosary to change daily decisions. He warned that many Catholics pray sincerely, attentively, even emotionally, yet continue to live unchanged. In this case, the Rosary becomes a comfort rather than a conversion. Consolation without transformation eventually dries up. He explained that the Rosary is not meant to stay inside the prayer time. It is meant to extend into choices, habits, reactions, and priorities. When someone finishes the Rosary and immediately returns to the same patterns of impatience, resentment, dishonesty, or indifference, the prayer remains incomplete. Grace has been offered, but not welcomed into action. Padre Pio said, "The Rosary forms the conscience slowly, like water shaping stone. But if the soul resists that shaping, the water flows away." This resistance is rarely intentional. It often looks like excuses. "That's just how I am. God understands. I'll change later. This is too hard." Padre Pio was firm here. He said, postponing obedience is still disobedience, just dressed politely. One of his strongest teachings was that the Rosary educates the will. Each mystery presents a choice lived perfectly by Christ and Mary. Humility, obedience, sacrifice, trust, perseverance, forgiveness. When we meditate on these mysteries but refuse to practice even a small part of them, we create an interior contradiction. The prayer speaks one language, the life speaks another. He warned that this contradiction weakens spiritual authority. Many people wonder why their rosaries feel powerless against temptation or fear. Padre Pio said, "It is often because the soul prays for strength but refuses discipline. Grace strengthens what the will cooperates with. It does not override freedom." Padre Pio also corrected a dangerous misunderstanding, that praying the Rosary excuses moral delay. Some believe that as long as they pray, they can take their time changing. Padre Pio said prayer is not a substitute for conversion, it is fuel for it. Without movement, fuel serves no purpose. He taught that after every Rosary, the soul should ask one simple question: what is one thing God is asking me to adjust today? Not tomorrow, not someday, today. This adjustment does not need to be dramatic. Often it is small: holding the tongue, choosing patience, resisting gossip, forgiving silently, returning to confession, restoring prayer discipline. He said, the Rosary becomes powerful when it produces obedience, not just emotion. Emotion fades, obedience remains. Another major correction Padre Pio emphasized concerns spiritual passivity. Many people pray as spectators, waiting for God to act while remaining inactive. Padre Pio rejected this mentality. He taught that grace invites cooperation. God initiates, the soul responds. Prayer is not passivity, it is alignment. He often told penitents that prayer without effort becomes sentimental. Effort without prayer becomes pride. The Rosary unites both when prayed correctly. It humbles the soul while strengthening resolve. Padre Pio also addressed a subtle danger, using the Rosary as spiritual anesthesia. Some pray to numb pain rather than heal it. They avoid confronting wounds, sins, or broken relationships by hiding in prayer routines. Padre Pio said this is not healing, it is avoidance. He insisted that true prayer brings wounds to the surface so God can heal them. This can be uncomfortable. The Rosary may stir sorrow, remorse, or restlessness before peace arrives. Padre Pio said, this is a sign prayer is working, not failing. Grace disturbs before it restores. He warned especially against praying while harboring unforgiveness. He said, unforgiveness acts like a sealed lid over the heart. Grace knocks but cannot enter fully. The Rosary includes repeated petitions for mercy. When we refuse to extend mercy, we contradict our own prayer. Padre Pio taught that forgiveness is not agreement, approval, or forgetting. It is releasing the right to revenge. He encouraged people to bring the names of those who hurt them into the Rosary, even when emotions resisted. He said, the Rosary softens what logic cannot. He also spoke strongly about consistency. Many pray intensely for a short period, then abandon the Rosary when results are not immediate. Padre Pio said perseverance is the Rosary's hidden engine. Grace accumulates invisibly. Breaks in prayer weaken momentum. He taught that fidelity matters more than enthusiasm. A Rosary prayed faithfully during dryness is often more powerful than one prayed emotionally during comfort. Heaven values perseverance because it reflects trust. Another key teaching involved humility. Padre Pio said pride can hide even in prayer. People begin to compare how many rosaries they pray, how long they pray, how intense their devotion feels. This comparison poisons prayer. The Rosary is not a performance. He reminded souls that Mary never draws attention to herself. She always points to Christ. A rosary that produces pride is already off course. A rosary that produces humility is aligned. Padre Pio also warned against spiritual curiosity. Some become more interested in signs, feelings, or extraordinary experiences than in conversion. He said curiosity weakens discernment. The rosary is not meant to satisfy curiosity, but to purify love. He taught that the correct fruit of the rosary is not fascination with the spiritual world, but deeper charity, patience, and obedience in ordinary life. If prayer does not make a person gentler, more truthful, more faithful, something is missing. As the year 2026 approaches, Padre Pio's teaching becomes urgent. He believed many believers would pray more, but obey less. This imbalance leads to frustration, confusion, and loss of peace. Prayer and obedience must walk together. Ask yourself honestly, after praying the rosary, do you become more willing to change or more comfortable staying the same? Do you listen for God's correction or only His consolation? The rosary is not meant to leave us unchanged. It is meant to shape us into people who resemble what we contemplate. Mary does not want admiration without imitation. In the next part, we will uncover the final and most decisive aspect of praying the rosary correctly, according to Padre Pio, the interior stance of trust during uncertainty and silence. Without this, even sincere effort can collapse under fear. With it, the rosary becomes a source of stability no matter what the year brings. Padre Pio taught that the deepest test of whether the rosary is being prayed correctly appears not during moments of peace, but during silence, delay, and apparent unanswered prayer, because this is where most believers unknowingly abandon trust and replace it with anxiety. He said, many Catholics pray the rosary faithfully, yet secretly measure God's love by results. And when visible change does not come quickly, fear begins to speak louder than faith. The rosary then turns into a negotiation instead of surrender. Padre Pio warned that this interior shift is subtle but dangerous, because fear corrodes prayer from within, while keeping its exterior form intact. He explained that the rosary is designed to train the soul to remain steady when God is quiet, not to panic when heaven seems slow. Every mystery of the rosary contains long stretches of silence that we often overlook. The hidden years of Nazareth, the quiet suffering before Calvary, the silent waiting of Holy Saturday. Padre Pio insisted these silences are not empty, they are formative. When someone prays the rosary correctly, they are learning to stand before God without demanding immediate reassurance. This is especially critical for the coming year, because Padre Pio repeatedly warned that times of confusion test trust more than times of suffering. He said, when believers demand clarity before obedience, they reverse the spiritual order. Obedience comes first, clarity follows later. Many people abandon the rosary because they say, I prayed, but nothing changed. Padre Pio corrected this thinking sharply. He said the first thing that changes is not circumstances, but the soul's capacity to endure them. Grace often strengthens before it resolves. The rosary builds interior resilience long before it alters external conditions. This is why impatience weakens prayer. Impatience treats God like a clock instead of a father. Padre Pio taught that every rosary should end with an interior act of trust, even if no answer has appeared. He encouraged souls to say silently, I trust you even now. Without this act, the prayer remains incomplete. Another critical teaching concerns surrender of outcomes. Padre Pio said, many prayers fail, not because God refuses them, but because the soul secretly dictates how God must answer. The rosary is not meant to control heaven, it is meant to align the soul with heaven's wisdom. Mary's role in the rosary is central here. She never rushed God. She pondered, waited, trusted. When the soul prays the rosary while clinging to control, it contradicts Mary's spirit. Padre Pio said Mary does not bless anxious prayer. She transforms it into trust when the soul allows her to. This requires letting go of timelines, expectations, and imagined outcomes. He warned that anxiety during prayer is often disguised pride because it assumes we know what should happen and when. Trust dismantles this pride gently but firmly. Padre Pio also taught that silence after the Rosary is as important as the words spoken during it. Many people rush back into noise immediately after finishing the final Hail Mary. He said this robs the soul of integration. Grace needs quiet to settle. He advised remaining still for at least a minute, allowing the mysteries to echo within. This silence is where God often speaks, not with words, but with interior peace or conviction. Without silence, prayer becomes consumption rather than communion. He also emphasized that fear-driven prayer attracts spiritual confusion. Fear invites restlessness. Restlessness invites distraction. The Rosary prayed in fear may increase anxiety instead of peace. Padre Pio taught that fear must be actively surrendered during prayer. He recommended placing fears intentionally into each mystery, especially the sorrowful mysteries, not to relive them but to release them. He said, Christ does not ask us to carry crosses alone. He asks us to carry them with him. When fear dominates, the soul forgets companionship. The Rosary restores companionship when prayed with trust. Padre Pio also addressed spiritual dryness, which many mistake as failure. He said dryness is often a sign of growth, not regression. God removes emotional sweetness to purify love. The Rosary prayed faithfully during dryness becomes extraordinarily powerful because it is no longer sustained by feeling, but by choice. Choice pleases God deeply. Padre Pio said, heaven counts these rosaries differently. They are heavier with merit because they cost more interior effort. He warned believers not to abandon prayer during dryness because doing so trains the soul to depend on feeling instead of fidelity. Fidelity is the backbone of spiritual strength. Another essential teaching concerns spiritual noise. Padre Pio said, modern souls are saturated with noise, opinions, and constant stimulation, making recollection difficult. The Rosary acts as a counterforce, slowing the mind and restoring interior order. But if the soul refuses to reduce noise outside prayer time, recollection weakens. He taught that prayer and lifestyle must cooperate. A distracted life produces distracted prayer. This does not require withdrawing from the world, but it requires discipline, limiting unnecessary input, guarding interior silence, choosing depth over volume. Padre Pio said the Rosary reveals what needs to be simplified. Resistance to simplification weakens prayer. He also warned against praying the Rosary while entertaining persistent grave disorder in life without intention to change. Prayer is not magic. Grace does not coexist comfortably with deliberate resistance. The Rosary invites alignment. When alignment is refused, prayer becomes heavy. Padre Pio never discouraged sinners from praying. He discouraged insincerity. He said, even broken prayer offered honestly opens a door, but prayer used to avoid repentance closes it. He taught that sincerity attracts mercy more than perfection. As the year approaches, Padre Pio's warning becomes sharper. Many will pray more because they are afraid, but fewer will surrender more. Fear-driven prayer seeks security, trust-driven prayer seeks God. Only the second produces peace. Ask yourself honestly, when you pray the Rosary, do you feel calmer because you handed control to God, or more restless because you are waiting to see if He complies? The Rosary is not meant to increase tension. It is meant to anchor the soul. When prayed correctly, it stabilizes the heart even when the world shakes. Padre Pio said a soul anchored in trust cannot be easily manipulated by fear, rumor, or despair. That is why the Rosary is dangerous to darkness. It produces quiet strength. In the final part, we will bring all these teachings together and confront the decisive choice each believer must make. Whether the Rosary will remain a habit or become a lifeline, whether it will be a routine prayer or a transforming surrender that carries the soul safely through uncertainty, change, and whatever the year ahead may hold. Padre Pio taught that the final and most decisive dimension of praying the Rosary correctly is transformation of obedience because prayer that does not gradually change how a person lives becomes self-referential instead of redemptive. He said, many believers pray sincerely, yet compartmentalize prayer from daily decisions, treating the Rosary as a spiritual shelter rather than a training ground for holiness. The Rosary, when prayed as Mary desires, reshapes the will. It softens resistance, clarifies conscience, and strengthens the courage to obey God in concrete, sometimes uncomfortable ways. Padre Pio insisted that true devotion to the Rosary always produces movement. Movement away from sin, movement toward virtue, movement toward reconciliation, humility, and charity. If a person prays the Rosary daily yet remains hardened, resentful, dishonest, or spiritually stagnant, he said something essential is missing. Grace never leaves the soul unchanged. If change does not appear, the soul may be blocking it. One of the most common blockages Padre Pio identified is selective obedience. People want God's protection, peace, and blessing, but they resist His correction. They ask Mary to intercede, yet refuse to forgive, to renounce a sinful habit, or to accept a difficult truth. The Rosary then becomes a comfort ritual instead of a conversion path. Padre Pio was gentle but firm about this. He said Mary is a mother, not a shield for disobedience. She intercedes powerfully, but she also educates the soul. When the Rosary is prayed correctly, it exposes areas that need repentance. This exposure is not condemnation, it is mercy. Many people stop praying seriously at this stage because discomfort arises. Padre Pio warned that this is precisely where perseverance matters most. He said, when the Rosary begins to disturb your peace, it is not because something is wrong, but because something is being healed. Healing often hurts before it restores. Another essential teaching concerns humility. Padre Pio said the Rosary crushes pride slowly but effectively because it repeatedly places the soul before mysteries it cannot control or fully understand. Humility grows when the soul stops trying to master God and begins to receive Him. This is why pride resists the Rosary. People who rely excessively on intellect, self-sufficiency, or control often find the Rosary tedious or ineffective. Padre Pio explained that the Rosary is simple on purpose. It bypasses ego defenses and trains the heart. He said demons fear the Rosary not because of its complexity, but because of its humility. A humble soul is difficult to manipulate. He also taught that praying the Rosary correctly restores spiritual order in families. Disorder in families often begins with disordered authority, unresolved resentment, and unspoken fear. The Rosary reintroduces hierarchy: God first, then love, then sacrifice. When families pray together, or when one member prays faithfully for the others, Padre Pio said grace begins to flow through invisible channels. Arguments soften, resistance weakens, and hearts become more receptive, sometimes without dramatic confrontation. This does not mean problems vanish overnight. It means the spiritual climate changes. Padre Pio emphasized patience here. He said the Rosary works like water on stone. It does not explode resistance. It erodes it gently, persistently, and irreversibly. Another key point Padre Pio made concerns perseverance during failure. Many believers stop praying the Rosary when they fall into sin because they feel unworthy. Padre Pio called this a trap of false humility. He said the Rosary is medicine for the sick, not a reward for the strong. Stopping prayer after failure only deepens discouragement. He encouraged souls to return to the Rosary immediately after confession and even during ongoing struggles, as long as there is a sincere desire to change. Desire matters more than perfection. The Rosary sustains desire when strength is weak. Padre Pio also taught that the Rosary must eventually overflow into charity. Prayer that remains self-contained dries up. When the Rosary is prayed correctly, it awakens compassion, patience, and attentiveness to others. A person becomes less harsh, less reactive, less consumed by self. He said, Mary always leads outward, never inward. If prayer increases selfishness, something is wrong. Correct prayer expands the heart. Padre Pio warned against using the Rosary as a substitute for responsibility. Some people pray intensely, but avoid necessary actions, conversations, or commitments. He said prayer prepares action, it does not replace it. The Rosary gives clarity, courage, and timing, but obedience still requires effort. Mary said yes, then acted. The mysteries always include movement. The Rosary teaches readiness. As the year approaches, Padre Pio's message becomes urgent. Many souls will seek security in prayer without surrendering control. This produces anxiety rather than peace. The Rosary prayed correctly produces steadiness, not escape. It anchors the soul in truth. He said the coming times would test interior foundations more than external stability. Those who pray superficially will feel shaken. Those who pray deeply will feel grounded, even amid uncertainty. The Rosary is not a guarantee of comfort, it is a guarantee of companionship. Mary does not promise ease, she promises presence. Padre Pio concluded that the Rosary ultimately teaches the soul how to die well, meaning how to live detached, trusting, and surrendered. Each mystery trains the heart for loss, hope, resurrection, and glory. When prayed correctly, the Rosary slowly removes fear of the future because it roots the soul in eternity. Fear thrives on uncertainty. Faith rests in God's character. The Rosary forms faith daily, quietly, persistently. Padre Pio urged believers not to postpone this transformation. He said many wait for crises to pray seriously, but by then the soul is already exhausted. Prayer must be formed before storms arrive. The Rosary is preparation, not reaction. If you have listened this far, the question is no longer whether the Rosary is powerful, but whether you are willing to let it change you. Not just your emotions, but your habits, priorities, and attachments. The Rosary does not demand perfection, it demands honesty. It asks for time, attention, trust, and obedience. If you offer these, even imperfectly, grace will work steadily. Padre Pio promised that no soul who prays the Rosary with sincerity will be abandoned, but he also warned that sincerity must include openness to conversion. As this part closes, examine your heart. Are you praying to feel safe or to be transformed, to control outcomes or to trust God, to maintain routine or to grow in holiness? The Rosary will respond according to how it is approached. In the final conclusion, we will draw this entire journey together and confront the decisive invitation Padre Pio leaves for every believer standing at the threshold of a new year, to choose between habit and surrender, repetition and relationship, comfort and conversion. Padre Pio always ended his spiritual guidance with a moment of decision because truth that is not acted upon becomes heavier than ignorance. Now that you have walked through the deeper meaning of the Rosary, its errors, its power, and its demand for conversion, the final question is unavoidable. What will you do with what you now know? The Rosary cannot remain the same for you after this. Either it will become more alive, or it will slowly fade into routine again. There is no neutral ground. Padre Pio taught that grace always invites a response, and silence is itself an answer. This conclusion is not meant to pressure you, but to awaken you, because heaven never forces, but it always calls. He warned that many believers mistake comfort for peace. Comfort avoids tension, peace endures it. When the Rosary is prayed incorrectly, it often produces a temporary comfort that fades as soon as difficulties return. When it is prayed correctly, it produces peace that remains even when circumstances worsen. This is why Padre Pio said the Rosary prepares souls not for easy days, but for faithful days. He foresaw times when faith would be tested less by persecution and more by distraction, exhaustion, and discouragement. In such times, only prayer that has depth will sustain the soul. Surface devotion will collapse under pressure. The Rosary prayed correctly becomes a school of interior stability. Day after day, it trains the heart to return to God rather than react to fear. It disciplines the imagination, calms the emotions, and strengthens the will. Padre Pio said, This is why demons fear the Rosary, not because it causes dramatic manifestations, but because it quietly forms resilient souls. A soul that prays well, does not panic easily, does not despair quickly, and does not surrender hope under trial. That kind of soul cannot be easily manipulated. As a new year approaches, Padre Pio's warning becomes sharper. He said many people would pray more out of fear than out of love, asking God to protect them without allowing Him to transform them. Fear-based prayer clings, love-based prayer surrenders. The Rosary invites surrender. Each mystery teaches the soul to release control. Mary does not fully understand, yet she says yes. Jesus does not avoid suffering, yet he trusts the Father. Glory comes only after fidelity. If the Rosary is prayed honestly, it slowly dismantles the illusion that we can save ourselves. This dismantling can feel uncomfortable, but it is the doorway to freedom. Padre Pio emphasized that the greatest danger is not praying the Rosary incorrectly once, but persisting in incorrect prayer while resisting change. God is patient, but time is real. Grace has seasons. Repeated invitations ignored eventually grow quieter, not because God withdraws love, but because the heart becomes less receptive. This is why Padre Pio urged people to respond when prayer begins to stir restlessness, conviction, or a desire for deeper commitment. Those movements are not obstacles, they are signals. He also reminded believers that praying the Rosary correctly does not require extraordinary conditions. You do not need perfect silence, ideal emotions, or long uninterrupted time. You need intention, honesty, and perseverance. Even if distractions return, even if emotions remain flat, even if the struggle persists, faithful prayer still works. Grace often operates beneath awareness. The Rosary shapes the soul quietly, like roots growing underground long before fruit appears. One of Padre Pio's most sobering teachings was this: the Rosary reveals what we love most. If we rush it, avoid silence, resist meditation, or grow impatient, it is often because something else holds our attention more tightly. This is not a cause for shame. It is an invitation to reorder priorities. The Rosary is not meant to compete with your life. It is meant to align it. When prayed correctly, it slowly places God back at the center, where everything else finds its proper place. He also insisted that the Rosary is never a private possession. Even when prayed alone, it is ecclesial, intercessory, and outward-facing. Every correctly prayed Rosary carries others with it: family members, the suffering, the forgotten, the souls in purgatory. This is why Padre Pio said the Rosary expands the heart. A person who perseveres in praying it well becomes less judgmental and more compassionate, less reactive and more merciful. If prayer makes you harder, something is wrong. True prayer softens without weakening. As this journey concludes,